with some limited hip motion and some limited ankle motion that can squat perfectly all the time. And so both of these guys can kind of go together as well. So what do we do about these things? That's the big question. Is like I just told you guys all these things that are wrong, and so how do we go about changing that? And how do you work with your high school athletes that are middle school or youth athletes that you're seeing once a week for 2 hours on how we can actually go about this kind of stuff, or how do you include something in a routine that you're doing at home to help you reduce some of these things? And so it starts as simple as training the squat. So I was talking to another PT who's worked with, over in Chicago, who's worked with a girls basketball team. And so what he did was they started with just looking at how everybody squatted, and then they've gone from doing 10 squats at the beginning of practice, where everybody was complaining about their knees hurting and not being able to do them. And these are high school women's basketball players, right? So they play basketball all the time. And they do 10 squats and they're all like, oh my God. And so now they do 30 squats as part of their warm-up. And it's just about training the right way to do these things to take some of the stress off the joint. And so one of the things I included here is just a little, she's got a little band around the knees, because while a lot of people think that if I want the knees further apart, I should put something in between them so that they're not able to come together. The big thing is that I want to sort of create an increased contraction of these muscles out here. And so to do that, I want to give a cue to the knees that says, hey, we need to push out a little bit, instead of giving them something so they don't have to work. So we want to give them a cue to push out, activate these glutes a little bit more, and then come squat down through there, right? And so it doesn't have to be a super deep squat. I don't need the butt to touch the ankles, right? But I'm just looking for something down into that parallel mark and then coming back up, right? And this is something that you can incorporate in your warm-ups for kids, right? Is that we got to be able to do some squats, or I would say not only include them in your stuff at the beginning of practice, but include them at the end of practice when people are tired, right? Just like shooting free throws at the end of practice when you're a basketball player. Like, you want to do this stuff when you're tired too. That way you're training your body to do it all the time. And the other thing, like I said, we want to increase glute activation and strength. So one of my favorite ways to do that is just a resisted side step. So you see if you ever are early enough to a Flyers game, you'll see that the guys are always doing side steps with the band, and then they're coming and they're doing some forward and backward steps too. But these are an important thing to really make sure that we're getting those glutes active before you're going to be asking them to fire a lot, but also just for general strengthening. And so a single leg bridge is an excellent way to do that too. The big thing that you got to watch for here is just making sure that those hips stay level and that you're not arching through that low back. But these are great things that you can incorporate in what your players do, or in your warm-ups before practice and before games. And so the big thing for me is that you see a lot of guys that will do these things before they go. Like, so I played in A-League last night, right? So these guys that we were playing with, they do, before they're going to go to practice or before they go to a game, they do this kind of stuff all the time. But before A-League last night, that was not what they were doing. And so it's like these kind of things are habits that you need to kind of ingrain so that you're doing them all the time and not just when you want to, right? Because when you're playing, you're still putting yourself in harm's way a little bit. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about dynamic warm-ups, because that's going to be a big part of it. So static stretching decreases muscle strength for the next 30 to 60 minutes following stretching. So the big thing that I feel like a lot of people are getting away from is doing a lot of long, prolonged holds right before they're going to do activities, right? You'll still see, actually baseball, and it's a sport where I feel like you still see a lot of it, but they do that like 2 hours before the game. So you want to, if you're going to do any static stretching, you want it to be like way before the game or before you're going to play. So dynamic stretching, pre-activity, looking at like 5 to 10 second holds. And then you can do static stretching after activity when you're looking to really increase muscle length, right? So what we're looking for with dynamic warm-ups, we want to increase muscle elasticity, promote glute and hamstring activation, and increase blood flow to the posterior chain muscles. So when I say that, I mean glutes, hamstrings, some of the muscles in the back too, the calves, because those guys, we really want those guys to fire a lot. We get in trouble when we rely on our quads too much for these sort of activities, for our jumping, our pushing off. When we rely on our quads to do all that work, that's when we get in trouble. So I just wanted to give you sort of like how I like to go about it. So because I've been interested in physical therapy and been a physical therapist, I feel like that's always been part of my job on teams, is to go through the warm-ups, and so I was like, well, you guys probably want at least some basics on what you would go about doing. So I always say start light, and I like to start with like some of our dynamic type hold stuff, and then progress to some more explosive types of activities. This is a little smaller than I wanted it to be, but I always start with the jog, and then like hip flexor and pigeon stretching. So if you guys are familiar with those, just a nice like a kneeling stretch coming up, and then taking the leg across as well, because you still want to get into those guys a little bit. But with both of these, like I said, you're going to be 5 to 10 seconds on and then off, and 5 to 10 on and then off. And then I always like to, so after you get up from doing these, you want to go ahead and do some squats. If you're going to do them with a band, that's great. If not, just doing them where you're focused on keeping those knees over your toes and not letting them come in. Walking lunges, forward, sideways, walking single leg deadlifts, so that guy is going to look kind of like this. So you're going to be here, you come down. Not my best work, sorry. Come down. And so that's also going to help us increase activation of our glutes and hamstrings too. Walking leg swings just to improve muscle elasticity a little bit, and then moving into some more dynamic stuff. High knees, butt kicks, side steps, and push-offs. You can also do some karaoke and that kind of stuff too. Broad jumps are great. Thrusters, working on increasing that activation. So a broad jump is just going to be coming through here, right? Jumping, you can take a couple steps and then go through them. And then a thruster, I just do sort of, you want to get a little lean forward, push, 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 and then jog it out, right? So push hard for a few steps, and you can increase those too. You can do 3 steps, 5 steps, 10 steps, whatever you want to do. And then I like to do so to really increase our activity a little bit right before we're going to play, I always like to do something where you're, number one, it's a little less predictable, and number 2, it's going to really kind of ramp you up some. So you'll have to, it'll be forward, backward, sideways, however you're going to go forward, back, right, and then same thing to the side. But yeah.
Hey George.
Yeah.
So before you go to the next one, so if you're starting from dead cold, right, you're just showing up at a tournament that morning, it's 8 o'clock, game's at 9. All right, jog. So how much warm do you need to be before you start? So after the first bullet.
Right.
How warm are you after the first bullet before you start doing these other ones?
And so you don't have to be super warm before you go into those other things, because I want you to warm up as you're going, right? So I would say, 1 or 2 laps around is all I'm really looking for, right? And we'll kind of increase our elasticity a little bit as we go. And I want that jog to be real light. Yeah.
Okay.
Kaylin's next. So.
Any other questions for George?
I'll come back later, I promise.
Think of some good ones.
Yeah.
Do I know how to use it?
Yeah, you just hit over.
Okay. Okay, let's see. All right. So I'm going to talk to you about concussions and concussion management. Now, basically the goal of this was to really just talk about the myths of concussions, kind of, and the best ways to manage them. Not that I expect you to assess them, diagnose them, take the athlete through all the treatment and whatnot, but I kind of want you to know what to expect, what you should be looking for when an athlete returns to you and says, hey, I had a concussion last week, but I'm good to go. Like, what are the little warning signs that maybe they're not ready, those kind of things, so that you'll know at least, hey, did you get that note, did you do this, kind of what your standards should be as a coach and someone who's with athletes, and also for you, if you're playing Ultimate, what you should be looking for yourself, what you should be doing before you go back into activity and things like that. So the first thing I'm just going to talk about is just basically what is a concussion. And I feel like we've all heard about concussions a lot. It's a big topic right now, but they're really important, and it's probably the biggest injury I see. It's the most common injury. It's in all sports. It happens all the time. You do not have to hit your head to get a concussion. It can happen from whiplash. It can happen from many things. So just because you're not necessarily being tackled to the ground and thrown down and slammed down like a football player, you can still get a concussion, okay? So the first thing is when I just looked on WebMD, because this is what people do, right? They Google it, like, what is it? I don't know. So I went on WebMD, and they kind of had a pretty correct definition of concussions, which is a type of traumatic brain injury. It's caused by a blow to the head or body, a fall, or another injury that jars or shakes the brain inside the skull, okay? So then I went and I just Googled what is a concussion, which is usually what kids do and people like that. And it was more of an incorrect definition, so I just wanted to make you aware of that. It started with temporary unconsciousness, which is not true. Okay, so that was back in the day when they used to grade concussions and talk about concussions. You had to be unconscious for it to be considered a concussion, which we have found is no longer true. Any blow to the head or shake of the brain that results in some type of symptom is considered a concussion, whether you're unconscious or not. So I just want to make that aware to everybody. So was everybody familiar with that beforehand? Okay. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that. So I'm just going to go to the next thing. So another thing you often hear is a concussion's a bruise to the brain. Okay. Has anyone heard that before? Okay. So if you hear that something's a bruise, what does that mean? What is a bruise? Anybody?
Cellular damage.
Okay. That's actually more accurate as to what a concussion is. So a bruise signifies bleeding, right? There's bleeding under the skin. That's why you have a bruise. Okay. I hope that concussion's not bleeding, because a brain bleed is obviously very serious. It's a medical emergency. So a concussion is not a bruise. Your brain is not bleeding. Okay. It is basically the brain contacting the skull inside, causing cellular damage, causing a chemical imbalance, and that's due to brain cells getting slammed against the skull and stretching and things like that. So if you hear someone say it's a bruise to the brain, that's not accurate. That is a very severe, I mean, concussions are severe, you know, they're serious, but that's even more of a medical emergency, okay? So when a kid goes to the urgent care and they say, I did a CT scan and my brain's not bleeding, so I don't have a concussion, that's not necessarily true, okay? Can't see a concussion on a CT scan. It's based on assessment, tests, eye tests, symptoms, things like that. Okay, any questions on that? Feel free, if you have a question while I'm talking, to just ask. And as you can see here, the brain sits inside fluid and is not affixed to the skull. So basically, anytime you jar the head, the brain's going to move back and forth, okay? And this is a forward movement, but they've actually found that the hits that are actually can result in more severe concussive symptoms are the shearing forces, so a side movement where the brain's actually going this way. And that's just where it's hitting the brain and the parts of the brain that are affected with that kind of movement as well. So it can happen either way. And so you see all these devices that, you know, you see the soccer players that wear the big padding on their head and all that kind of stuff. And that's great because it prevents skull fractures and things like that and more severe things. But until you can affix the brain to the skull inside, you're still going to have that jarring motion. So they're not going to completely prevent concussions. They can make things less severe, but you're still going to have that jarring motion. Okay, so one quote I heard years ago that I thought that really stuck with me very strongly was, concussions do not kill people. Mismanagement of concussions kill people. Okay, so concussion itself should not cause long-term damage necessarily, should see no effects later on in life, memory loss and things like that. It's improper management of the concussion, returning back to sports too quickly, getting repeat concussions, things like that. That's what causes us to have long-term effects and problems. Okay, so I don't know, have any of you heard of second impact syndrome? Okay, so second impact syndrome is when the brain swells rapidly after a person first suffers a concussion and then returns to sport too soon, suffers another concussion, and then sees permanent damage, death, things like that. It's very rare, but it does happen. Okay, what's more common and what we see more often is just the effects of your symptoms being exacerbated if you return too quickly, and therefore lasting longer than normal. So that's the more common result. So you're not going to always get second impact syndrome. That's very rare, but it can happen. It is a risk. But we're more concerned about is just, you know, instead of the concussion healing up in 7 to 10 days, which is the average for a high school athlete, it now taking 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks because we decided to try to go run or we decided to do this before we really should have. Okay. So I wasn't going to go into, if you need more information on symptoms of a concussion, you know, basic information on what a concussion looks like, you know, let me know, let Tristan know, we can get you more information. I kind of feel like everybody knows basic symptoms, headache, dizziness, really anything out of the ordinary. If a kid comes to you and says, hey, I just got hit in the head and now I don't feel right, that's a symptom. Okay, so anything out of the ordinary is something that you should look out for. But what I wanted to talk about was the Feller-Waller Concussion Awareness Act. Has anyone heard of this before? Okay, so this is in North Carolina. okay? It's a great law that went into effect in 2011. It's named after 2 kids that passed away after their concussions were mismanaged in North Carolina. And so basically they came together and decided they were going to mandate some things in public schools to make sure that we are managing concussions properly. And it's basically, it's not required by everybody, obviously, because it can only be required in public schools, but it's something that are standards that are practiced at the college level and at higher levels where we feel like everybody should pretty much follow it and be aware of it. It's definitely where we should kind of set our expectations. And it's pretty easy, it's basic stuff. It actually makes it life easier for coaches, and that's what I like about it, is it's kind of outlined for you. It says this is what you can and cannot do, and therefore you don't have to do any weird, decision making or assessing if it's a concussion or not or anything like that, okay? So it outlines the importance of education on concussions, how to recognize a concussion, doing things like we're doing now and talking about it, how to treat concussions in an emergency situation, so if your athlete goes unconscious, things like that, and then more importantly, how to safely return back to athletics and not returning too quickly. And so since, especially for you guys who are not going to always have at your practices the medical personnel and things like that to really make those decisions, it's good for you to at least have an idea of like, okay, this is what I see, this is what shouldn't happen. Luckily now at all your games and tournaments and things like that, you have an athletic trainer, so that will help in that situation. So if you're at a tournament for Triangle Ultimate and you have an injury and you have a question, look for your athletic trainer because they are there somewhere if you haven't already seen them, okay? But like I said, it's mandatory for all North Carolina public schools. And the main points are that any athlete who presents with 1 or more symptoms of a concussion may not remain in or return to competition that day, okay? And so symptoms can take 24 to 48 hours to fully develop. So they basically have said, just because, let's say they get hit in the head, and in 20 minutes they don't have symptoms anymore, doesn't mean that within the next 24 hours those symptoms aren't going to return. They're not going to have more symptoms and things like that. So as soon as a kid comes to you and they say, I got hit in the head and I have a headache, done. Okay? And that's what I like about it, is it makes it easy. Say that's the rule. If they come to me, they said they have a headache, I don't have the